All right. Welcome. Thank you all for staying. It's been a few long days. This is the +1 day of a conference, last session. I appreciate you all for hanging in there. We're going to have a relaxed conversation about academia and industry and the interplay, how to nerd snipe people. Up there we have the OG. Bless you. OG nerd sniping with some Easter eggs. So, okay, I'll start by very briefly introducing you. Feel free to correct me if I say something like egregious. Malesh Pai, professor, Department of Economics at Rice. Has a background in and has been working in mechanism design and his interaction in industry. Maybe you caught his talk earlier today and is working with the special mechanisms group. Neha Naruda, she has a background in distributed systems. She's the director of the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. And she has had some also collaboration with industry, part of the board at Block, right? Finally, Andrew Miller, professor at UIUC. You're at the Department of Electrical Engineering. It's very electrical engineering. He has a background in cryptography and computer security, and he's been interacting with industry for a while, in particular with flashbots and other projects. So to see different backgrounds, everyone in academia, everyone with some level of involvement in industry. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some good alpha out of you all. So, all right. So I had like a few questions prepped that I shared beforehand. We don't have to stick to those, but maybe why don't we start with what is like in your minds, and this is to any of you, in your minds a good model interaction between industry and academia. So what is one good example of that you would look up to for us to, anybody want to take that?
Good example. I think there's like a wide variety of what's been good sort of crossovers. So if you look back to Microsoft Research, Google Research, they had one particular model that worked well for them, which is they had these industry researchers come work for them for a couple of years. Some of them stayed on and helped sort of turbocharge some project. The other model that I'm particularly fond of that's been going well is Amazon Research. So Amazon has like this scholar program where they get people in and they directly work with a team. So it's less like pure science research. You get put into a team. You're still affiliated with the university, but you also are like you have ownership of a product in a way that maybe some of the other research collaborations I've seen with academia don't have. So those are examples that I've seen and liked, and you need a variety of models to appeal to different people in different stages of their career.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting about this area is that a lot of technologies emerge from academia or from research labs of some sort, maybe industry research labs, but they have very close connection to academia. And this area did not at all, right? I mean, it came out of a mailing list, right? And so academics were really sort of late to the game in a way, and and I think that's, we've seen a lot of that. What's been really surprising to me about this area and so interesting is that you can do research, really good research, not in academia. And that's not always the case in all fields. This is really a space where you see very high quality research coming out of non-universities, whether those are research, foundations or open source communities or companies. And so it's really been a very different dynamic than what I think we've traditionally seen.
Yeah, this is a very good point, I think, and maybe it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's maybe a problem in that at least I feel we don't have very solid theoretical foundations, and we're coming from like a milieu of different things. And yeah, Tarun gave a talk earlier today on like in the formalization of MEV. I talked a bunch already about like formalization of MEV and the difficulties with it, and yeah, so solving this is a problem, and I feel there's a little bit of passing on the responsibilities, right? Like it's when we talk out with academics, we tell them, hey, we have this problem, why don't you come help? And they ask us, well, okay, what is the problem? And we're like, well, and we gave them very fluffy answers to that. So who in your minds is like responsible? And maybe this is because of what you're pointing out, right? And it started in an odd way. So who in your minds is responsible for doing the hard work of giving solid definitions and sort of like setting up the formal foundations of a field like ours? Is it industry? Is it academia? Is it among both? Or?
Is that a question? Or?
Yeah. So who like? Who has the ultimate responsibility of like giving the formality to the field in order to give it its like a proper tenure as like an academic field, so that we can lure more academics to work on it, right? And in my mind, like formalization enables the compounding of knowledge, right? And I don't think we're there yet.
I think formalization is a good example of something that's still like very much the academia-oriented technique. I think for formalizing things, academics kind of still take the initiative of that. I think cryptography is a good example of something that really used to be mostly the innovations of it done in academia rather than industry. That's a little bit changed recently with ZKP and everything taking over. Something that I think there have been many examples before, but still is somewhat like undervalued, is like a Grand Challenge Prize kind of things. Mm-hmm. Like DARPA's done really successfully with different projects. That seems like something that industry could do. I think the kind of form that's most interesting, and still I don't see so much of it, but it's like kind of what you were mentioning, but long-lived residencies in one way or another, whether it's industry researchers like hanging around at a university for a protracted period of time. I've had a bunch of folks come visit, just unofficially, not even recognized by the university, but hang out at UC for a semester and take classes and just show up and stuff. A conversation I've had a bunch of time with people from industry is essentially that they undervalue just how easy it is to invite yourself to just show up and give a talk at any university. Like academics are surprisingly, receptive of that, even if you don't have any particular, just say you're from industry and they'll be, impressed and intrigued. And so I think it's easier than people even expect to, invite yourself to hang out at a university. I think academics do well at kind of going for short visits or for, short leaves, but think in terms of these kind of segmented units of time, like get out of teaching for a semester, basically. Mm-hmm. So hanging out with industry for, a unit of time is, I think, either way, I think a good way to do it.
I think just going back to one part of your question, which is like you go to an academic and then you don't have a clear answer. You phrased it somewhat as a negative, but I think it's kind of a positive, right? Like you want to find like there's a bit of a matching problem where it's really unlikely that there's a well-defined problem out there and no one has actually then gone ahead and thought of solving it. You want to find the academics who sort of want the sort of the amorphous nature of the space, because then they get to shape it a little bit. So it's more about just starting conversations. Everyone sort of, academics are in this, we're often in our super formal world. We have our well-defined definitions. We have our views on how sort of well-behaved models work. And then there's the real world, and then you have to start bridging a little bit in terms of like, okay, let's try and understand what these primitives mean and how we can map them over.
That's great. I'll quote you on that. It's the academic's responsibility to do this work then.
I think, but I mean, it's the academic's responsibility to show interest, and you need to find the ones who are interested. But on the other hand, it's also like, the other thing you can't do is like, you can't show up at a conference and hope that there are like, someone there has like just dreamt up the exact solution that you're looking for. There is going to be a process ahead of that. So, it takes a while. Formalizing stuff and getting the right definitions is like the hardest part of the job. That's the stuff that wins, going back to Phil's talk in the morning, that's the stuff that wins the Nobel Prizes, right?
I also want to just say something. Formalization, or the process of what academics bring to the table, doesn't always mean math, and it doesn't always mean proofs. I think that there's this, I've often heard this mistaken assumption that that's what it means to get academic, is, oh, you write these theorems and these proofs and you do this math. And certainly there's a large portion of research and in the discipline that is that. But I come from a space, I come from systems, and we build systems. We don't necessarily prove theorems or write proofs or even write down, you'll have a paper without any math in it. And that doesn't mean that it's not formal, and it doesn't mean that you're not doing science. You still are doing science in that you're responsible for sort of framing the problem, describing your solution, understanding the related work very carefully, understanding the difference, and also having a methodology by which you evaluate your solution and show that it makes sense, right? And there's very, like I said, very little math in there, but that process, I think, is something that is so important and that I don't always see captured in industry, is showing, for example, this is my hypothesis and this is how I showed that my hypothesis was correct. So anyone who could read this could also convince themselves that it was correct. And you can do that even if you're not writing math or proofs. Like there's still, you can do that with natural language, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So. I
agree, yeah. So what are some pitfalls? What do we want to avoid in the interaction of academia and industry? What should we not be doing, whether we're doing it or not?
So I think sort of both the two corners, I mean, maybe you want those corner solutions, but for most people, the two corner solutions are the ones to avoid. So one is sort of hire a brilliant person, give them a bunch of money, go solve our problem, and hope that they come out of their cave 6 months later with a solution. That's part A. That's one example of unless you're you have a very specific reason to want this person, that's fine. But that's sort of, I don't think, the goal of this kind of interaction that we're talking about. The other one, so that's one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is to try and hope that the academic is part of somehow rubber stamping the solution that you wanted in the first place. I think the successful ones are give and takes. You'll get some academic papers maybe that don't solve your problem but help, like Neha said, help add more shape to the space. And then along that, maybe you'll get some solutions that aren't even formal, but that just work better than what was working before. And this convergence process, helping this convergence process along, to me, is sort of the most important part of an industry academic collaboration. That's sort of the ones that I've seen done well have been ones where not all of it has resulted in papers, but it's not the case that nothing got published either. So, yeah.
That's great. So moving on to MEV a little bit. So in your respective fields, what do you think it's the maybe the open problem or the question that if solved would be most impactful for the field of MEV, or more generally for crypto, if you have an answer to that?
I kind of want to go first. The first thing is something that I've kind of warmed up to after not seeing it this way for a while is just what a good use case for privacy technologies MEV is. So I had this, when first talking with Flashbots, my reaction was, oh, you're using privacy entirely the wrong way. And that the kind of very short-lived, nothing matters after the next block arrives, so at most you have a short-term interest in privacy. And maybe that's true for the most important cases, but it started to become clear that in a lot of cases there's a very long-term privacy that matters as well. When you have bids that fail, you don't want those to be published because that revealed how much you were willing to pay and that it's unmet demand. So you're probably still going to try to satisfy that demand a little bit later. So that's a long-term privacy goal that you would want. There are a lot of other kind of examples along those lines. And one of the things that's been the perennial problem in especially privacy-oriented cryptography is that users don't conceive of privacy at an individual decision-making level very well. It's hard to quantify the impact of your lost privacy, at least at the individual level. Maybe this is a little better at the social or societal or policy level, but at the individual level it's kind of stuck. MEV very broadly is how the information you leak can be used against you economically, and there's like a dollar value attached. So it's actually like a really tidy kind of use case that motivates these privacy tech. So now with that viewpoint, I'm not at all surprised to see that MEV solutions are things that can utilize kind of the whole range of zero knowledge proofs and MPC and the like. So I think that's why it's a good problem use case for that. I guess I would also say that just to have I had thought of this for the answer, but having like really fast, fully homomorphic encryption that you can run in a threshold setting, I mean, that would go a long way towards making a really effective architecture. I mean, that's just an open problem that's motivated by all sorts of things besides that, but this is one use case that's good for it too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I'll go one step out actually. So I've been joking with people. You probably heard me say this. Like I keep saying that crypto is like a full employment act for mechanism design and game theory people. And part of the story is, I mean, like yes, of course, you need all the technology in the world. You need all the encryption stuff, all the MPC stuff, all of that. This wouldn't exist without that. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get a bunch of decentralized actors, people with different interests, to behave to get a system to go together. There are going to be incentives involved, and you want to think through analyzing and solving those incentives. So I don't have a grand open question, but I think modeling and understanding incentives of the players in this space, and then thinking about how do we design good mechanisms and good incentive schemes that make them behave in the ways that we want for our system. That's like what I hope my people bring to the table.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to say what, to define that one problem that I think would change crypto. But maybe speaking historically, one thing that I think crypto has done for the field of distributed systems is absolutely blown open the space of the design of distributed consensus. That has been, I think you can absolutely characterize that as a major contribution by crypto. Before cryptocurrencies and decentralized systems, consensus was viewed in sort of very brittle, strict terms, very permissioned. The fault tolerance models, didn't really take into account incentives very rarely. And I think, they only worked at a very small scale. And I think the use case of cryptocurrency is really it's amazing to me the way that field has changed. And that's really what got me into it. And it's been so generative. And it's really even brought together people who specialize in mechanism design and game theory with distributed systems researchers, with cryptographers in a way that's been really fascinating and interesting. Something that I'm still trying to understand, and I think it's been really interesting to me being here at this conference and this year, is the design space for the architecture of these systems to achieve scalability and lower latency. I think that there's still a lot to be done there, and it's been really interesting to see the types of systems that are currently being developed now and sort of the points that are being investigated on the space from really decentralized to more centralized systems. I'm seeing, that language get more clarified about, what exactly you're assuming and what the risks are, and people exploring more points on the design space. So that seems really generative and interesting too.
Do you see MEV specifically yet kind of pushing things in the same way? You're answering like mostly crypto broadly. And
yeah, I'm quite frankly still trying to get my head around what's going on in MEV. I think that it's definitely having really interesting architecture implications and connections to that, where are the forces of centralization and how might we counteract them in the design of the system. So, yeah.
Just to answer part of that question, like the generative nature is sort of interesting. Like maybe 10 years ago, if I said I wanted to do mechanism design with a cryptography element, there are a few papers out there. And people were like, why are you doing this science fiction? If you want to run an auction, you run the auction, right? What's all this MPC? What do you mean you don't have a trusted third party? So this idea, it's actually opened up a whole design space of questions that were not legitimate research questions, when now there are people, all of you, who literally need solutions. And we have to collaborate to come up with those solutions. So that's been super fun.
That's great. You talk about incentives a bunch, and we are used to think about incentives. So speaking of incentives in academia and in industry, can we talk a little bit about how these differ, and do they need alignment in particular, and more generally, we as like incentive thinkers, what can we bring to the table in this discussion of aligning the incentives of academics and people in industry.
I think, I mean, unless one of you wants to go first, I think part of it is like you need a variety of models. There are different academics who are looking for different things. There are different companies who are looking for different things. And what there needs to be is sort of like what I'm surprised, and some of it has happened, right? Like, so the Ethereum Foundation has grants, which are like open-ended attempts to get people into the space. There are long-term academics visiting some companies. I think there just needs to be a broader spectrum of ways of engagement. Because when you say alignment, like it isn't like industry is just looking for money, 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 and academics are just looking for paper, 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 right? Everybody has different things they want at different points in their life, different points in their career, different ways to make impact. So you just need to make sure that there's a collection of touch points where people who have the skills that are needed for this industry are able to contribute in ways that are mutually beneficial. Things like Amazon, a version of like large companies should be considering things like versions of Amazon Scholars programs where people from industry, like people from academia go part-time, maybe something like Andrew said, where industry people try and go, bunch of people you have go take a formal class on distributed systems or cryptography or mechanism design, all of that.
Yeah. Something that's been on my mind is that industry and academia have a different view of what a solved problem means. So to make a novel thing in academia, you have to consider as already solved prior art anything that anyone has written about, at least in a peer-reviewed venue, but basically forum posts even have to count some ambiguity how far down you're going to look, whereas a lot of problems are not solved because they're written in a paper, but if no one's actually built out the system or the rest of them, that's a problem that industry will realize that they need to solve, and yet academics know they can't quite get the paper publication points for doing those. I still don't know the best way to solve that. It shows, I want to spend more time on open source stuff. I try to do a cool open source project and just know there's some little nugget of novelty that I can attach to it to make it pass, but I do think that is a fundamental, a misalignment to do.
Yeah, there's this term that one of my friends uses, which is cookie licking. And so you have this problem in academia where people will lick the cookie and put it back. They don't want to eat the cookie right now, but they lick it and they put it back, and of course no one else is going to eat that cookie. Yeah. And so there's this idea of you publish a blog post or you put out a little paper or you solve a little bit of a problem, and then nobody wants to touch it because it's sort of solved, or someone has already staked their claim on it. It's hard to argue a delta over that. And so I think that there's a lot in academia that doesn't get addressed because people are really looking for a certain type of problem where they can get a publication out of it. But some of the best academic papers are ones that go deeper and do a lot of work despite the fact that someone has already licked the cookie. But that can be very challenging.
Give me a sec before I wanted to ask you about your personal incentives. You mentioned that it's not money, money, money. It's not paper, paper, paper. So you as academics, and I was in a panel or an interview rather in Susalu where Ella was interviewing Vitalik, and she asked all kinds of very intimate questions. I don't want us to get there, but a little bit of a framework. Is it about the fun of the game? Is it about the reputational game? What is it for you personally when you do your academic work, if I may ask?
I've noticed about myself that I can go through periods of time or in transitional moments where I'll do super ego kind of thinking and try to pick a direction that matters for some sort of big aim, or do something good or do something big that's new and important. But then as soon as it gets into any sort of progress on it, I totally feel myself responding to the incentives of publication. I get really thrilled when the reviews come in. It's the whole publishing thing is this bizarre slow feedback cycle, but once you just get used to the rhythm of it, it's very addictive and has all of the adrenaline hits and stuff from getting reviews. So that's just responding to very local incentives, getting attention, invited to talk. Those are all I think part of it and what I respond to. So those are like definitely present. I'm still trying to make sense of something that Sriram from Eigenlayer said, which is that when academics appear to be, not motivated by money, unlike capitalism industry where that's very explicit, what you have instead are basically competing for status, and that in some way is even more opaque and can be worse or more dangerous. And I don't know, I probably butchered that and don't have my own opinion about it. I've just been thinking about it recently.
I'll speak from an economist perspective. This one's specific because it's slightly different. Like, I think computer scientists, and I was one in a past life, like, you have this joy that when you come up with something, often, even if you don't code it up directly, you get to see it work, right? A lot of our theories, especially in mechanism design, like, we don't get to put these things to work. Like, I could have a better market microstructure, and if I want to change how the New York Stock Exchange runs, I will have to spend 30 years lobbying Congress and government and who knows what, and even then they probably won't listen to me. It's working. Why do we need to change it? So one of the things that I think is especially appealing about the crypto industry right now is its willingness to experiment with mechanisms, with incentive structures. If you can give a reason, sort of explanation of why you should do something differently, so I just gave, like, at some point I gave one talk that got on YouTube and a bunch of crypto people happened to see it. And then, like, the next week I had, like, 2 calls where, like, hey, we want to code this up and try and use it. And I'm like, whoa, you mean not like me write the paper, send it, wait 5 years for referees and then get rejected? No. Okay. So that is something that does appeal to, on top of all the other incentives, money, publication status, this idea that you get to, see how your babies work in the real world, that is exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything Andrew said about the dopamine hits and the cycles and things like that. But I think also impact, right? I mean, there's just this real desire to work on things that will make an impact in the world and hopefully make the world a better place. And we've all sort of chosen our different theories on how to best do that. We've all chosen our different theories on how to best do that. I think also intellectual interest. I mean, I think that's why a lot of people go into academia and stay in academia is because they want to work on problems that they find beautiful. And, theoretically, academia gives you the freedom to do that if you aren't, too captured by the trying to get publications in or teaching and things like that. So, yeah.
So speaking about making an impact and being, again, in the field of incentives and knowing incentives, and what can crypto do to improve what can crypto do for science, essentially? In my view, the incentives in academia are somewhat, if not very broken. Maybe we have a spectrum of belief, but like, I was an academic before, and the several year cycle wasn't enough for me. I as Maresh was saying, the faster cycle. And I think like publication, like all this work academics do for free for journals, right? And there's like a replication crisis like all over the place, and people like p-hacking or all these practices, like were deliberate or not, right? And so many things for the editorial industry, many things in academia that are not. There's this paper in Nature this year where they show how the disruptiveness of science is going down. Essentially, it's more incremental, right? People are like protecting their careers and publishing only little by little, less people going for disruption. So anyway, is there anything we can do from crypto and like our work with incentives to improve the situation for science generally?
I think that's already happening, in the sense that impact in crypto does not come from publication in peer-reviewed venues. That's like a trailing indicator. And so I think that's already like really promising, that someone who comes up with a really cool idea can see it, like people will come and will find you and want to use it. You can solve problems that will get deployed very, very quickly, and are very exciting because so many people will be using it, and so much will rest upon it.
Agree, but that's mostly in our field, right? If I say how do we impact like fields out like biology, how like can we like design incentive systems with the technologies we deal with to make an impact in academia at large?
I mean, I had one small suggestion, which was sort of the immutability of our chains. gives us some ability to maybe have provenance of the underlying data. So we, not econ per se, but behavioral fields have been dealing a little bit with fake data lately. Allegedly fake data, I should say, in case I get lawsuited as well. So stuff like that. Things like can the credibility of the underlying technology be used to give other things credibility, maybe, but how can our incentive systems? I haven't got a useful thought on that.
I think crypto should be competing with the existing academic and funding structures. So there should be a crypto native alternative to the National Science Foundation. That would be like a crypto science foundation. I think that there's kind of a nice momentum and maybe opportunity of this to, I think, really like deliver on these kind of, philosophical goals that are fairly widely shared and appreciated in cryptocurrency about spurring innovation, doing so in like a democratized way. It's hard to say exactly what form that would take. I mean, the NSF, as you mentioned, like impact, I mean, that's the philosophy. You have to, like, in any NSF proposal, justify your broader impact. You basically have to argue why what you're doing is not incremental, but why if it's successful, it would be transformative and have all of the, this impact. So I could imagine that might just as well easily come out of a Vitalik blog post or something. And so I think that there's some opportunity to basically say, we'll do more disruption, we'll perhaps correct some of those things, like provide balanced funding for things like replication and artifact production that are, otherwise have a risk of being missed. So yeah, I think that's one way to potentially do it.
Fork the NSF. You heard it here. You heard it here first. David, you had a question. Yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah, so the question was like, from my perspective, at least when we look specifically at the blockchain industry, like academics are kind of like 0 or 1 in the sense like they either like they don't understand, they don't touch those things, or they spend like more than 80% or 100% of their work on it. So first question, do you share that perspective? And if you do, like what can we do to like spread the gospel?
I do share that perspective in the sense that when I talk to my colleagues, I have a few who get it, and they are people who are already working or have papers in the space. They might not be 100% working on crypto-related projects, but I'm talking about econ, but then 90% of my colleagues literally are like, really, you're working on this stuff? Can I send you a tulip? Like the bubble reference. So it's I think it's true. I think part of it is we need to. The news is sort of people learn about new stuff from like sources, and they're seeing all the bad news that's out there. They're not seeing the underlying technical questions that would actually excite them. I think you have a slightly easier job. Maybe I don't want to speak for you, but convincing that side of the aisle to come over. I think for us, it's like maybe a little bit more work, and you guys have done a nice job, like trying to water it down a little bit more into our language, where it's easier to sell. Like here is a class of question, here is a data set, like yeah, so stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's two sort of things there. One is crypto somewhat unique in this 0 to 1 sort of quality? I don't know if it is. I mean, academics are pretty 0 to 1 generally. They sort of tend to focus on something that really grasps their attention. But if crypto is unique, then another question is, well, how do you just get more academics interested, right? And I think maybe that's part of what you're asking, whether it's 0 to 1 or not. How do you get more working on it? And I think there's a very big narrative problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think academics are responsive to the visible public narratives that's seen. So I mean, crypto doing a better job of swatting down scams and promoting more pro-social uses and all of that, and going for a longer period of time without terrible thefts and frauds and such as the main thing that normie you see on the mainstream media. That you basically have to have already been there earlier or gone really deep into it for some reason, I think, to see the really interesting problems and, cool viewpoints of the, subset of folks developing really great stuff rather than that. So, you either get through that kind of layer of misery and bad ideas and then are really strongly into it and willing to, put up with the weird looks from your colleagues who only, also see that, and they're very gentle and respect, my intellectual freedom to work on crypto, but obviously I know what they've seen on the news last week, so that's definitely, I think, whatever inhibiting effect that would do that. I guess it would that's an interesting question. I'm trying to think whether I know my colleagues as 0 to 1 or not. I will say that academics go through phases. That's just the natural, it's the great thing about that cycle is you can pick up a problem, obsess over it for a semester, flush it out, pick up a new thing. That's kind of the, rhythm by design. So I've known a bunch of people who have done a lot of crypto things, switched to like another facet of their topic. Some come back for another phase and go. So maybe at any given time at 0 or 1, but like, PWM or something.
I'll just add one more thing to what you said, which is academics are 0, 1. They're also, like everyone else, the herd mentality. Like for the longest time, there were like 8 people who were like just going on working on deep learning, and all of machine learning was different, right? We were doing, statistical decision theory, VC dimension stuff. And then suddenly there was like this phase switch where now it's 90%. And like when I write a theoretical machine learning paper, the looks I get are like, what are you doing, man? Why are you doing this? So, that's another thing that, once they see a bunch of, there's some nice technical problems, there's some progress on that, the thing might switch. I also want to throw that back, like people are trying, and I know this panel is about attracting academics, but one thing I do want to compliment the crypto sort of community on is the quality of research I see out of people. I know some of you have PhDs, and that's fine, but from people without PhDs, like people who I don't have, I've seen research in other fields by people who are not formally trained, and it's night and day. And I maybe one other thing that should be thought about is how is crypto managing to pull this off? These are incredibly technical questions. Why don't these people need PhDs to somehow power through it? How is it selecting into those people? So that's maybe something else.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it has to do with, so it's a very meritocratic industry. I perceive it as such, at least. And I think it has to do with like the fact that it's a disruptive industry, right? So as it disrupts with the status quo in other areas of society, it's also willing to disrupt with the credentials and whatnot, right? And you have like 12-year-olds coding like smart contracts, and like that's fine, right? If the code is good, like that's. So yeah, I think that's great. Yeah,
and that's refreshing.
For the NSF.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Quintus, go.
I often find myself faced with problems that I anticipate that academically trained people, you guys, would be able to address better than me. And there are many such problems, and I know I have many friends in academia who are looking for problems. And I'm curious if you guys, in your experience coming into crypto, perhaps, like less so you, Andrew, because you have been here for so long, but also your friends coming into crypto, if there's some sort of communication gap, is there some sort of information that we can, or problems that we can communicate better to make the transition and the sort of development of interest in crypto a lot smoother and more efficient?
Yeah, so one thing that frustrates me a lot is that it's very hard to find good write-ups and descriptions of a lot of the concepts and names and ideas and things that are floating around. And academics need that in order to sort of iterate on that and to understand what to do. I mean, there's so much that's just in a Twitter thread or something like that, you know?
You say that like it's a bad thing.
It's a horrible thing. It's so hard to find out what a term actually means. And I know it takes time to work that out. It's really hard to find out, you know, some people will refer to a specific design or architecture. It can be very hard to find out how that thing actually works, and without reading the code, literally. And that's just not something that's feasible to do, to like backwards understand the design principles from the code. And so that can be very frustrating, and that can create, I think, a big gap. And so what I've seen is that there are a lot of academics who are just very stubborn and are reading like forum posts or Twitter threads and citing them, and just they do this like deep dive. But I think there's a lot who aren't necessarily willing to do that deep
There's
dive.
a bot that renders Twitter threads to PDF.
But does it also translate the language appropriately?
And does it have citations?
So, but just to add to that, I think one of the things that, like crypto in many spaces, it's developed its own language to describe what it's dealing with. And sometimes it uses, in the specific case of like econ and game theory, it uses the words and it uses them differently than we use them sometimes. If I was in an academic audience and not worried for my safety, I would say it uses them incorrectly. But no, it's language, right? It means what it means within the context of the community. And that's fine. So I think one of the things that could be invested in, and I think this, like, I know that like SBC, for instance, has like SOKs, like systematizations, and that is a great service. We need to have more of that kind of service where we can summarize what's understood better in a language. If you try and get, like there are people whose contribution might not be necessarily to push forward the frontier. It's to summarize the frontier and get it into things that then are bite-sizable and breakable into, communicating with academics. So that might be part of the problem, that you have questions, but you're asking them in a language that, maybe I understand now because I've spent a lot of time on Twitter, maybe too much. But people who don't know the language struggle to make the...
I agree that that's a challenge and that there's not enough of that. And I think it's part of the same like disruptive character. Mm-hmm. I think this industry invites more people that are entropy inducing rather than entropy reducing.
That part is not, to me, it's not specific to this industry. Like when computer scientists started to do game theory in the late 90s, early 2000s, the same thing happened. They used the same words, but they meant slightly different things in some cases. And it took a while for some convergence to happen. But, we fought at it. But yeah, we worked at it.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's no such thing as too much time on Twitter. Just a very brief follow-up to that. So I understand that a Twitter thread isn't always like the most, the best format to communicate information. And apart from the language side of things, the format can be important. But from an industry perspective, there's a lot of different problems that you have to spend your time on, and there's only so much you can do. Mm-hmm. And so like writing a full academic paper and trying to get that to conferences is a lot of overhead. So is there sort of a clear line where you think, this must be like it must be some paper on archive, it must be written in LaTeX, like what is the cutoff? Is like anything outside of Twitter okay? Or?
Yeah, I think a blog post is fine as long as you sort of like, or maybe even a Twitter thread, but I think that there are certain components of it that are very helpful, like clearly defining your terms and what you mean by them, and then comparing to related work. So this is something that industry has so far not been very good at. It's not unique to crypto at all. I especially saw this in the database space. It's like marketing speak. Like it's like, I have this database and it's amazing. It's like super fast and does all these things and it's wonderful. And you can't really get at what is this thing actually doing. You never get anything for free. You can't violate impossibility results. So what trade-off are you making? What do you not do as well? Like, making that stuff very clear makes it much easier to understand what's going on and to contribute.
There's something specific I've noticed academics do in a sequence of papers, which is they will like competitively re-explain the prior related work, and you can tell they are trying to flex by giving a better explanation of like the previous guy's work than even they did. And you can see this progression where like the first paper that introduces something explains it in a very weird way, especially if it's like from the 80s and yours like the weird like typeset font, but like the later explanations get like better and better and better. And so they don't just say, for a background, see this prior one and move on to the new stuff. They really try to give, not even the SOK papers, but even an ordinary paper will like really put a lot of effort into its intro and related work of explaining and mini systemizing within them. And I think it's a lot of rewriting, but I think that's the process by which you get like better explanations towards the end.
And all the PhD students here will know this, that you spend a huge amount of your time trying to understand and know the systems that came before you, or the designs that came before you, or the theorems that came before you. Whatever work came before you, you spend so much of your time becoming an expert on that before you can add your contribution.
Okay,
and describing that is so helpful. Yeah.
I think we need to wrap. So this is a great message for people in the industry. Set the right background compared to what it's done already. This is useful for academics. So any final message you would like to give to either people in industry to make it easier for academics, or to academics to start contributing to these fields?
I would just want to end by echoing that I think that the general writing discourse that's come from the crypto, research space, I think has really improved. It's a lot better than it used to be with just early Bitcoin fighting. It's really elevated a lot, and I think is really now kind of more credible.
Yeah, I just want to say, I want to echo that things have improved so much. I remember in the past, I think academics often made assumptions or didn't understand the assumptions that crypto people would not want to violate ever. And so they did a lot of work that was really not useful because they didn't understand the core important assumptions. And that was a communication problem. And I mean, now the discourse is such higher quality. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just add like sort of, I think there's more academics who want to contribute to the space. And I get Quintus's point, right? Like, you guys are super busy too. You're not here to like handhold a bunch of people and bring them along. But I think it's worth investing in like just trying to find, you're not going to get these immediate matches where somebody is out there with exactly the solution to the question you're looking for. Or you can just cold call someone and be like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem, what's the solution? And just because they have like a Nobel Prize, they're like, oh yeah, here's your solution, like ready in 30 minutes, like a Domino's pizza. It's going to take a process of going back and forth. And you, like, I hope you guys are also willing, to invest the time. I hope you find it profitable. I think there will be more profitable collaborations based on this. There's slowly more and more people coming in, so.
Amazing. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all. Be patient and contribute is the TLDR. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you, Alejo, Neha, Malesh, and Andrew. So that concludes our content for the day. Thank you all for your attention, and thank you to our speakers. A couple additional notes. So just thrilled to have been offered this main workshop space. So thanks to the conference organizers and specifically to Dan, Ari, and Dawn. Also thank you to the AV recording and streaming teams today for pulling off a seamless event. Let's give them a round of applause. Just a quick plug to go to collective.flashbots.net to the /research section if you'd like to have follow-up conversations on any of the topics you heard here today. Also to check out FRP if any supplementary funding would be helpful to continued exploration of these ideas. That's the small grants program that Flashbots runs for research. You can find more about the projects that we've funded in the past on our forum there as well. And everyone have a nice day. Thank you.